Welcome to Scaling Up H2O, the podcast where we scale up on knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. My name is Trace Blackmore. I get the privilege of being the host of the Scaling Up H2O podcast, and I want to welcome you to another brand new episode of Scaling Up H2O. I want to thank all the people that were on the hang that we had yesterday. I love doing these hangs because I get to see so many people out there. So if you have joined the hang and you can't wait to join the next one, or you've heard about the hang and you just haven't joined, now is your chance. We're going to do another one February 11th. We can go to scalinguph2o.com/hang. You can register for the hang. This is where we get to meet new people. We get to talk about the industry. We get to learn about new things in the industry. Folks, it's a very simple way and a fun way, I might add, that we get to network with new people. So please go to register scalinguph2o.com/hang. And again, the date is going to be February 11th at 6 p.m. Of course, we're also doing a special webinar series in conjunction with the Association of Water Technologies. And our next event is going to be January 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Our speaker is John Fenton, CEO Sensei. He's been on the podcast before. John has a lot of great information to share with us. He's going to give us some information. He's actually going to give us some things that we can work on right there during the webinar. And then he's going to crystallize exactly what we should be working on based on the information that he gave us. Folks, this will cost you absolutely nothing. Please register by going to scalinguph2o.com/business. You will not want to miss either of these events. Folks, one of my favorite places on the planet is Disney World. My parents took me there when I was 6 years old, and then they took me back when I was a little bit older, and my wife and I actually got married at Disney World, and that's where we spent our honeymoon. We've been back numerous times. I truly believe it is the happiest place on earth, and I love to experiment with customer service issues at Disney. Now, that being said, I don't create my own, but there's always something that happens with customer service. There's somebody didn't get something that they were planning on. Maybe somebody didn't plan enough to get what they were planning on. And now there's somebody there as a Disney cast member, that's what they call their staff, that is in front of them that is helping them solve their issue. And folks, they solve issues like nobody else. Their customer service is second to none. The experience is everything. And everybody that works for Disney wants to make sure that you are having the best experience on whatever platform you're at, whether you're at a park, whether you're on one of their cruises, or all the other many things that the Disney Corporation offers. Well, today we are going to talk with Dennis Snow, who used to work for Disney, and he was responsible for creating a lot of these experiences and training people how to deliver them. So folks, I can't wait for you to hear this interview. I had a lot of fun conducting it, so please welcome Dennis Snow. My lab partner today is Dennis Snow. How are you, Dennis?
I am doing very well here in Orlando, Florida.
Well, I'm in Atlanta, and I bet we probably have the same humidity right now. I think we're about 100%.
At least. Yes.
At least 100%.
Yeah. These are the times we survive in the South.
That's right. If you live in the South, you got to just be prepared to be wet all the time. Dennis, you and I met at the Association of Water Technologies Business Owners Conference, where you were a keynote speaker there. And I got to tell you, after I heard what you had to say, I could not wait to get up out of my chair and invite you on this show. And you said yes.
Yeah, well, I'm honored. And I really did enjoy speaking with that group. As a matter of fact, great audience, seemed very receptive to the service excellence message. So I'm honored to be participating in this.
Well, there's no doubt about it. Us water treaters, industrial water treaters, we're a service-based industry, and that's what you preach. How do we deliver better service, outstanding service, second to none service, world-class service to our customers? And I think that's what we're going to be talking about today.
That's what I'm hoping we're going to talk about. Yeah, that's what I
Well,
love to talk about. Yeah, so we have 6 hours, right? We have 6 hours.
I think it's going to be an 8-part series we're going to
Okay,
do
all
today.
right, there you go.
Well, before we get started on that, you've got a very impressive resume, and I was hoping you would share a little bit of that with the Scaling Up Nation.
Oh, sure, yeah. So back in the late 1970s, 1979, I was in college and decided I was going to take a semester break and I was going to come down to work at Disney World for one semester. It was going to be a 3-month job and it ended up being a 20-year career. But I came down and I got a job. I was working on an attraction that's not there anymore, but some people may remember this, called 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I was Captain Nemo. So I started out on the front lines and it was fantastic. And then I got into management and managed different operating areas around the company. And there's an internal training division called the Disney University. That's where they do all the onboarding of new cast members and the management training. So I managed that for a few years. And then we spun off a division called the Disney Institute, where companies would come down to benchmark best practices with us. And then I did that for the last few years that I was with Disney. Then I hit the 20-year mark and decided that's a really good round number. And I thought I would start up my own training and consulting and speaking business. So that's what I've been doing since then, is working with organizations and kind of taking that Disney foundation, the principles I learned there, and helping apply it in other industries like water treatment, help apply those service principles in other industries. So I love what I do and love sharing that Disney story.
My office manager was an intern when she was in college with Disney, and she proudly has her master's degree on her wall.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll bet she gives great customer service too.
She is fantastic at that. And I hope we're all going to be fantastic at that as we talk today. You can't think of Disney without an experience. You can go to any theme park, a lot cheaper, I might add, but you're not going to go anywhere that you're going to get the same experience as Disney.
Well, that's the magic sauce, really, is what Disney really focuses on is we are not selling rides. We're selling an experience. So the rides are a part of it. But you think you think about all the moving parts in planning and executing a vacation to Disney World. That's what they look at as the product. How can we make each part of that experience, from the moment you start planning the vacation to the moment you leave at the end of that vacation? How do we make each step an excellent experience? And that's what's really the differentiator. And it's the same in any industry. Products are commodities, right? I mean, you think about most products, people have a lot of choices. The only real differentiator is how you make people feel, the experience that you're creating for them. So that's really what they focus on very, very carefully.
We went to Disney in February, and I remember we were in Epcot, and they're doing some construction at Epcot when we were there.
I know exactly the construction you're talking about.
Well, there was a family that was so excited to ride Test Track. And of course, it was closed. And the family just had a meltdown. And we witnessed a staff member walk across and have a conversation with that family. And almost instantly, the entire expression of the family changed from disappointment to excitement. And I wanted to ask you, because I didn't hear what they said, what would that conversation have sounded like?
Well, Disney has terms for everything. It's called turning a tragic moment into a magic moment. And so likely the discussion was, hey, we understand you want to ride this ride. It's one of the most popular attractions that we have. Here's what we're doing with it. So the next time you come back, this is what it's going to be, and giving them a little bit of inside information. But they then probably said something like, I want you to go over to XYZ attraction, whatever it may be. And I'm going to call ahead and say the Jones family is on their way, and just give them my name and they'll put you right on to the attraction. They can move you, they'll put you right on. You don't have to wait in line. You don't have to do any of those types of things. So it's one of those, and I can't say that's exactly what happened, but that's likely something along it. Disney cast members are very empowered to turn those situations around. No questions asked. So you take a family who was disappointed, and they're still disappointed that the test track wasn't open. Okay. So, but now they've got some inside information, but now they've been given a little extra something special so that they realize, okay, these Disney people really do care about me. And the other thing I love about stories like that one is that cast member didn't have to call anybody to get permission to do that. To say, hey, go right to the front of the line. I'm going to call ahead, and they'll put you right onto the attraction. Didn't have to call to get approval. They're empowered to do that kind of thing.
I can't help but think a business owner out there is listening and thinking, that sounds great. But at what point does an empowered employee go too far and that creates an issue?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And my perspective on that is I would rather have them go too far and have to kind of coach on what a more appropriate response would have been than have a very disappointed customer who's not going to do business with you in the future. So that's a conversation that I would love to have with an employee to say, I really appreciate how you handled that. Probably not the best business decision, to correct it, than have somebody that, just kind of blows the customer off and doesn't really care. So yes, those things will happen. And that's where our role as leader, as a leader really comes into play is, we need to be in constant training mode. And I think the best leaders they're in constant training mode about how to handle things. You handled that wonderfully, whatever it may be. One of the questions I used to get asked all the time when I was working there, I still get these questions. People say, how long is the training at Disney? And the answer to that is from the moment you express interest in a job there to the moment you leave, everything in between is training, because you're constantly being reinforced about what the guest experience is supposed to be. And again, I think that applies to a leader in any industry.
And you probably also got questions like, what time is the 3:00 parade at?
Yeah. The what time is the 3:00 parade is a classic question. And, the guests ask wacky questions. One of my favorites, and you probably remember this from the presentation, I would be standing there in my Captain Nemo costume, my sailor suit, my sailor cap, and guests would come up, and they'd ask, do you work here? Thinking, yeah, I'm a grown man. Look what I'm wearing. And, but the point that was always reinforced with us is that you may have heard these questions, the guests may ask these wacky questions, but like the what time is the 3:00 parade question, what they told that, what they trained us on is what they're really asking is what time does the parade get here at this particular spot? Now, that's a very legitimate question. They asked it in a funny way, but it's a very legitimate question. If they ask me in the Captain Nemo costume, do you work here? What they were really asking is, can you help me? They asked it in a funny way, but the real question was, can you help me? So the job, I think, of an employee in an organization is to look at what's the guest or the customer really asking. I'm sure the technicians, of the people that are listening to this podcast, I'm sure the technicians could have a list of questions that, okay, that's not really what the customer was asking. They really were asking this. And so the idea is to save the person's dignity.
I remember from your presentation, you always encouraged us to look through the lens of the customer. And that's what you're saying there.
That's exactly what I'm saying is you've got to look at it through the lens of that question that we've been asked 1,000 times. The customer they're asking it for the first time. Jargon that we're very comfortable with. Every industry has its own jargon. The customer that you're interacting with, they may be totally uncomfortable with that jargon. They may have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. So what that creates is the need for us, in whatever role we play, to be present and not be robotic in the way every customer, every guest is different. And if you're present in understanding the nuances, the body language, the tone of voice, it makes you tailor how you respond to that customer in a way that's appropriate for the situation. Now, secretly, we can have a laugh afterwards, at, what time is the 3 o'clock parade questions. But with the guest, the customer, maintaining their dignity is critical.
Something else I remember you saying, and my office manager says this all the time because it's in the Disney training, backstage versus on stage.
And that's drummed into you from the day you join the organization. There is, using Disney, there's that on-stage magic, and everything needs to build on that and reinforce that. Then there's a backstage. There's a physical backstage that's where the deliveries happen, and the cast member wardrobe areas and the cafeterias and so forth. That's all backstage, out of sight of the guest, because that would take away from the magic. So there's the physical backstage, but there's also the attitudinal backstage, where as cast members you wouldn't complain, you would never eat, drink, or smoke on stage. You wouldn't have inappropriate conversations with a fellow cast member. That all happens backstage. The example that I used in the presentation you saw, and I think it's a powerful example, is, imagine you're in the park and you see Cinderella on a smoke break. She's in the park and she's lighting up a cigarette, and your child, probably years of therapy involved, but it all collapses. So there's the physical on stage and backstage, but there's also that attitudinal part of it too, that as a cast member, once you're on stage, the show is on. So you think about in a water treatment situation, and you look at a water treater on a customer's site, you've got to be thinking about, okay, I'm in my customer's location. What does on stage and backstage look like and sound like? Your company vehicle. In many cases for a company, more people see your company vehicle than any other type of marketing that you do. So is what customers see in your vehicle as it pulls up to the job site, is it reinforcing the brand the way you want it to be reinforced? And that all goes back to that on-stage, backstage mentality.
As a manager, how do you train that?
You have to be relentless about it. You have to build it into everything. So, the training really starts with the hiring process. So as you're interviewing people, the thing that Disney does, and I always recommend to companies, is at each step of the interview process, make sure you're modeling the values of the organization. What you say makes you special, the aspects of the brand. Those things are your competitive advantage. So the hiring process really starts the training process. Then the new hire onboarding, talking through why we do what we do the way we do it. This is what creates intense guest or customer loyalty. So when I joined Disney, and I remember this very well. Now keep in mind, this was 1979. I remember very, very well the aspects of, here's the legacy of the company. Here are the expectations in terms of a cast member. It's not about doing tasks. It's about creating an experience. That was all built into new hire orientation, using a lot of stories and examples. Then when I went for my on-the-job trainer, so you've got a water treater that's out on a job site with a trainer, that's just been recently hired. Is that person that's doing the training modeling those service values that you said were important in new hire orientation? And then going forward, as managers, are we coaching people? Are we reinforcing these messages? Is it built into our performance appraisal process? So you take what is important to you as an organization that is going to differentiate you in the marketplace, and you build it into every process that impacts your employees. So, some people sound, well, that sounds an awful lot like brainwashing. And I said, well, to me, it sounds an awful lot like good business, and a little bit of brainwashing doesn't hurt to make sure that people understand this is what's expected. But I'll tell you, I'm a big believer in non-negotiables. I know you're the folks on this podcast and their companies, they have safety non-negotiables, right?
Absolutely.
So why shouldn't we have service non-negotiables? Because those are the things that are going to create or destroy customer loyalty. So I'm a big believer in non-negotiables.
Another item that you mentioned are creating moments of wow for the customer.
And it's the little things. When I first started my speaking and training business, I was guilty of this myself, that we get enamored with these huge, grandiose wow examples, where you really just did something just was outstanding, and legends are made of those. And we should look for opportunity to do those things. But what I've really come to realize over time is it's those little moments of wow that make the difference. In your world, industrial customer has an issue, a technician goes and takes care of it. And then that customer gets a call the next day from someone on the team just checking in to make sure everything was working fine, any other issues, sending an article that's pertinent, giving some advice on how to reduce downtime. All of those are just little things, but you put enough of them together and they add up. Little wows add up. So for us, for me, asking if I saw a guest getting ready to take a photograph of their family, hey, can I take the photo for you? So that you can be in the picture, so that the whole family can be in the picture. Seeing a child with the Mickey Mouse ears with their name stitched on the back of the Mickey Mouse ears, and calling the child by name, saying, "Hey, Peter, how are you?" And that would just freak the kid out. How did I know who I was? But the parents think you're wonderful. Big thing right now. I've got a 6-year-old granddaughter that we go out to Disney, and she always dresses up in one of the Disney princess costumes. And the cast members always call her by her princess name. Whatever costume she's wearing, they call her by that name. None of those cost anything. None of those are big deals. None of them take really any more time, or not much time anyway. But those are the things that create the little moments of wow. And so what I would suggest to your listeners is collect those stories. Sit down with your team and say, what are some things that you do that just make customers feel, that moment of wow? And you start perpetuating these stories. And what's great is when somebody shares a story of how they wowed a customer, everybody else that's listening to that story is thinking, oh yeah, I could do that. That's a good idea. I could do that. Or, hey, I've got a story. And that's how you start building that culture of creating moments of wow.
One of my favorite reasons to either cruise with Disney or go to one of the parks, my wife and I love finding hidden Mickeys. And from your presentation, I learned I wasn't looking in all the places, and it's just opened up a whole new world for us to look for hidden Mickeys in. We were always looking in the architecture. And you shared that at the Tower of Terror, when you're in the boiler room, that there's some rope that's coiled up as a hidden Mickey. And ever since you said that, we found so many little things that, somebody did for free that just changed the experience of us waiting in line.
And that's the point, is nobody likes to wait in line, right? So let's do something about it. Now you're going to wait in line, but over the years, they've done a number of things to minimize as much as possible the wait times. But one of the things that they've done is let's give people something to do while they're waiting in line. And, putting entertainment in there, doing pre-shows. But one of the things that they came up with was these hidden Mickeys, where, yes, it is built into the architecture as well, but it's also just those little things like the rope coil that you talked about. And so people are looking for things. There are non-Disney websites dedicated to tracking hidden Mickeys. And so while people are waiting in line, they're they're looking for these hidden Mickeys. And some people get pretty creative about what they think is a hidden Mickey. And I thought, no, it probably isn't. But thanks for trying. But the whole idea was going back to, let's take a negative aspect of the experience and put a positive spin on it.
Well, I tell you, they have an art of waiting in line. And I know there's a secret handshake when you ride the new Ride of Resistance, so we can't talk about that. But pretty much the entire ride is you waiting for the next thing to come up. I mean, that is just fantastic how they interweaved the waiting in line with the actual ride.
So one of the things that I would recommend to your listeners is to look at the processes of dealing with your company and look at what are the potential points of pain, because in any industry there are points of pain in the processes, and it doesn't matter what industry it is. There are potential pain points. And one of the wonderful ways to differentiate yourself is to look at those potential pain points and say, what can we do to at least alleviate some of that pain? Maybe we can't eliminate it, but to at least alleviate that pain point. You think about a doctor's office, and you're sitting and you're waiting in the doctor's office. Your appointment was at 1:00, and now it's 1:15, now it's 1:30, and you're just sitting there waiting and wonder what's going on. When are they going to see me? And all it takes is just one of the receptionists or one of the nurses to periodically just come out. We're running a little bit behind. It's probably going to be about 10 more minutes. Just wanted to let you know. If you need to reschedule, let us know. See, now they're taking that pain point. They've acknowledged it's a pain point, and they're doing something about it.
So Dennis, again, using your words, we're always trying to look through the customer's lens. How do we get buy-in for everybody to create that experience?
Well, again, we have to be relentless about it and train people on it. And what happens is if you are relentless about it as leaders and people understand this is non-negotiable, that's where the buy-in really begins, where it goes from a flavor of the month customer service improvement program to know this is the way we do things. The best example that I can think of from my days, and I think, again, it applies in your world, there's a concept that we call everything speaks, that every detail either enhances your brand or it detracts from the brand. And you want every member of the team to be thinking, are the details saying what they're supposed to say, just from their appearance as they're on a site. But the best example of that from my days was picking up trash off the ground. The number one compliment that Disney gets is how clean the place is. You build these $100 million rides. The number one compliment that they get is how clean the place is, which I guess from a design perspective could be frustrating, but that's it. And the reason for that is certainly they have a custodial crew. There's a custodial team, but every single cast member, from Captain Nemo to the vice president of marketing, one of the key parts of our job would be, if we saw a piece of trash on the ground, it was your job to go over and pick it up and throw it away. It was non-negotiable, because we knew that the cleanliness of the park is the number one compliment. And so you just start doing it because it's so ingrained in the culture, because it's reinforced over and over, and you see your manager doing it. You can't help yourself. And it gets weird because you start doing it in other places. You're in a mall and you see a piece of trash on the ground, you go over and pick it up and throw it away. One of my favorite photographs, one of my all-time favorite Disney photographs, is a photo of Walt Disney in Disneyland. It was probably taken around the late 1950s. And it was a photo taken of him, unbeknownst to him, and he was picking up trash off the ground and putting it into a trash can. And I thought, okay, does training get any better than that? Does it get better than that? And so that's the way you get the buy-in to things like everything speaks and the paying attention to detail, is it has to weave into everything that touches the employee, where they see, okay, this is part of the culture. It's not a program, it's the culture of the organization.
Dennis, any other advice you have for us for communicating the right message throughout the company?
Yeah, I would say from a leadership perspective, there's two things that I would like to stress here that I think are important for any leader. Is number one, in terms of communication, I would say there's three things. Be relentless. And I've already talked about being relentless. But number two, never let the coaching moment go. When something happens, there's a problem with a guest interaction, one of your employees didn't do something the way they were supposed to do it, and the guest was up, or the customer was upset about it. Never let the coaching moment go. Coaching is real time training. So, one of the best things that we can do, and when you look at coaching, it's not about scolding somebody, it's about teaching somebody. And so reinforcing what we're trying to create as an organization, what happened in this situation, and how that was a disconnect from what we're trying to create in the organization. What needs to change, going forward. So what's the learning from this? And a check-in, let's say let's get back together in a couple of weeks and just see how things are going. And that tells people it wasn't just a chat. But the main point I would say with this one is never let the coaching moment go. And then the third element that I think is very important in terms of communication is never let the recognition moment go. When you hear about something that somebody did, you get a call from a customer complimenting one of your employees, you get a letter, another team member shares an example of something that somebody did. Taking the moment to say, that's who we are. I appreciate how you handled that difficult situation or whatever it may be. That's worth its weight in gold. Trust me, they go home and tell their families about that. I think we underestimate the impact that appreciation has on an employee's morale. That, they literally do. They will tell their families about, hey, I got, my boss heard about this and said this, and boy, did that feel good. So, be relentless in reinforcing the message. Never let the coaching moment go, and never let the recognition moment go.
As you teach these systems to other companies, I'm sure you have a whole host of stories that you can share with us. I'm curious, what's one of your most extraordinary stories with working with companies?
There's a lot. There are a lot of things that I'm always amazed at when I go into companies, but there's one that I kind of use as my role model. It's a bank called First Financial Bankshares, and they will not mind me mentioning their name. They're based in Abilene, Texas. First Financial Bankshares. They asked me back in 2005 to come in and help them to work on their service culture. They used my book, Lessons from the Mouse, at first, and then they asked me to come in and do some consulting work with them and help them set up a strategy. And we put together a pretty extensive, it's a fairly big bank, and with many, many branches and many employees. And their level of commitment from the top of the organization throughout was unbelievable. So this was 15 years ago, and the systems that we put in place, they are still using. I stay in touch with them, and they're still using, and their new hire orientation, their ongoing training, their performance appraisals, their hiring process. While the elements have evolved over the last 15 years, their commitment to the strategy has stayed in place. And they're constantly rated one of the top banks in the country, one of the top community banks in the country every single year. They usually flip between 1 and 2. And it all goes back to the level of commitment has just been amazing. So when I see that in an organization, that's when I know this is going to work.
Working with all of these companies, have you noticed something that they all have in common?
Absolutely. It's the commitment from the top of the organization. That's the make or break, is when the senior team, in particular the senior leader, when she or he is totally bought in, that's when you know it's going to work. And when you meet with them and they're not totally bought in, that's when the strong probability this is going to be a flavor of the month. And when it gets hard, which it will, they're probably going to abandon it. So the commonality that I see, companies that really do institute a strong, sustainable service culture, it's when the top person is really bought in. And can I share a funny story?
Absolutely.
Did some work with an organization one time, and they invited me to do this kickoff to the service initiative that they were beginning. And I was trying to get a hold of the CEO for weeks in advance to have a conversation with him about this and get his perspective on everything. And so he was going to kick it off and then turn it over to me. Never returned my calls, never returned my emails. So I met him on the day of the kickoff. We had 600 or 700 people in the audience, and he walks in at the last moment. And I said, "Hi, Tom." I knew his name was Tom. I said, "How are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'd be doing a whole lot better if I didn't have to waste my time on things like this." And I just thought, let's just cancel this and I didn't say that because they were paying me a lot of money, but I thought let's just cancel this because this is not going to work. And he got up and gave one of the most uninspiring talks that I've ever heard. And it was just one of those things that I thought, all right, this is a flavor of the month program.
Now, how do you keep your motivation to keep going?
I hope that I can touch at least some of the people in the audience in a situation like that, where regardless of that lack of commitment from the top, that there are some people in that group that are going to take it and run with it in their own sphere of influence, because we all have our own sphere of influence, whether you're in a management position or if you're an individual contributor. There are always things we can do. So in that kind of circumstance, that's what I'm going for. I know that there are some people in this group who are going to buy into what I'm talking about, and they're going to do something about it.
Well, let's explore that a little bit, because I'm pretty sure there's some technicians listening to this podcast out there, and they're thinking that the things that they're hearing on this show just sound great, but they're wondering how they're going to go to their boss and sell what we're talking about. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I would say, buy my book, send it to no, I'm kidding. I would say that, first of all, look at your sphere of influence. What are the things that I can do myself to put these things into place? Because sometimes that's where it begins. It can begin with some of those just day-to-day actions that an individual starts. But then to start sharing ideas, if they have their Monday morning huddles or, those types of team meetings, to say, hey, I listened to this podcast and, there were some pretty good ideas in it. Here are some of the things that I heard. What do you all think about this? And, it's sort of a grassroots building of it. But at the same time, I would also say, there may be those circumstances where it's just going to impact that one person. And if that one person enjoys their job and feels the satisfaction of delivering excellent service, there's some real value to that. There's some real value to that. But in terms of moving it up the organization, I think it's a matter of just communicating and providing resources, a copy of this podcast, those kinds of things to start whittling away at some of the resistance that may be there. Always know, and I'm speaking to the technician right now who may be having that thought about, what can I do? There are always things that we can do as individuals, just in our interactions with our own customers.
I think that's great advice. Now, you mentioned your book. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, one of my books is called Lessons from the Mouse. And, obviously it's, based on my career with Disney World. And what I did was I took 10 key lessons, like never let backstage come on stage. What time is the 3:00 parade is not a stupid question. Little wows add up. And I came up with these 10 concepts that I thought these were at the heart of what made it work. And so I wrote Lessons from the Mouse with the idea of, here's a key customer experience principle. Here's what it meant from my days at Disney. And that's where a lot of the humor and the fun comes into it. Here's how I've seen it apply in other organizations. And then at the end of each chapter is a series of questions to actually apply it to your own role. So as an individual, you could apply it to your own role. Some companies use it as the questions as meeting thought starters, never let backstage come on stage. Well, what's backstage and on stage in our organization? What are the things that could detract from the brand in our organization? And it provides them some discussion points that managers and people can, some people have used it in company book clubs and so forth. But the idea is to take these 10 core customer experience principles and how do we apply them in our world? It was a really fun book to write too, because thinking back on it made me think back to some of my early days working there and the stories and that really touched my heart, through that 20-year career.
And you were telling me before we started recording that you had the intention that if somebody got on an airplane, that they could finish it before that plane landed.
Yeah, that was the way I wrote it. I wanted to be a fairly quick read. So each chapter is not a long chapter. And that's exactly what I did is I wanted it to, in terms of length, if somebody got on a plane and was, flying across the country, they could finish the book. So it's not a big, it's not a New York phone book book. It's a pretty quick read.
See, I think you sold a couple copies just with that.
That's the way I like to read too.
Well, I'll make sure to have a link for that book on the show notes page. I've got some lightning round questions, but before we get there, I've got one last question in this section. And if someone just tuned in right now, what's the bottom line? What's the one thing you want the Scaling Up Nation to get from our interview?
Yeah. It's the difference between a task mentality and an experience mentality. If people could just keep that in mind, every job has tasks that need to be completed. And we've got to do those and we've got to be good at those. But an experience mentality takes it to a different level. That now we're talking about the relationship that we're building with the customer. Because when we do what we do just with a task mentality, our customers feel processed. And it's really difficult to feel that loyalty factor when you feel like, they've just kind of processed me through a system. Where if we do what we do with an experience mentality, our customers feel valued. And valued customers stay loyal to you. So, that's a discussion that you could have with a team. That's a discussion that is a thought process. You could just pull out a piece of paper and say, okay, in doing my job, what's the difference between a task approach and an experience approach? But that's the difference. That's what differentiates a person and an organization is when they see like that themselves as I'm part of the experience of working with our organization.
Well, Dennis, this has been very enlightening. I know that you've inspired many people to not just go out there and do the task, but to create an experience. And I'm really curious to how people take this message and run with it. If I get any feedback, I will definitely share it with you. But before I let you go, I do have the famous lightning round to take you through.
Okay. All right.
All right. So you have the ability to go back in time and speak to your former self on your first day as a trainer, as a consultant. What advice would you give yourself?
I would say make sure you have a story that represents the concept that you're trying to communicate. Because the concepts, are usually data driven and they are important, but stories are what bring the things to life. So if somebody, let's say a technician is making a recommendation to a customer on a particular product or how to keep a problem from happening in the future, whatever it may be. Yes, to provide the technical information, but what's the story behind that? I had a customer, not too long ago that had this issue. So this is what they did. And I tell you, it increased the life of that product by XYZ. If you're a leader and you're talking to your employees and you're saying, okay, this is a process we're putting in place. This is a policy we're putting in place. but having a story that gives life to that on why this is important. So if I had to go back in time and do something different at the very beginning, I wouldn't focus just on the concepts and the data. I would make sure I had a compelling story for everything that I was communicating.
So I'm curious now, same question, but now you're going back to your first day at Disney. What advice would you give yourself?
Oh, that's a really good question. My first day at Disney, what advice? I would say volunteer for everything that nobody else wants to do, because that's where the fun comes into play, is getting to do different things and getting to be known as the go-to person. I had a guy that I worked with who, when I first started working there, his name was Tony, and he was just like that. He volunteered for I don't know if he ever actually did his real job. He was always doing these cool other things. And so I would, if I were to go back in time, I would say, Dennis, volunteer. If they say, we need somebody to do this, I'm your guy. We need somebody to do this, let me at it. That's probably what I would have done earlier on in my career.
I love that advice. I'm reminded by a story. A good friend of mine's a Chick-fil-A operator, and he was telling me that one of the least favored jobs is to put on the cow costume and go out because it's hot. It's hot. Nobody wants to do it.
Yeah.
Well, somebody volunteered to do it reluctantly. And there was a young girl, I think she was battling cancer. And just interacting with the cow just made her day. She was smiling, made her happy. And that just, made the person wearing that cow costume, so appreciative that she said, yes, I will put that cow costume on. And because of that story, now they've got to fight people to put that costume on.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah. And managers, leaders, they love people who are willing to step up and say, I'll do that.
That's how you get noticed.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the last few books that you've read, Dennis?
There's actually the most recent one kind of connects with what I was just talking about in terms of stories. There's a wonderful book. I don't know how long it's been out, but it's called Story 10X, meaning that stories can increase the power of what you're sharing 10 times, by Michael Margolis. Very good book. And really, it's not a storytelling book. It's about, how do you share the story of your brand? How do you share the story of your leadership style? How do you share the story of this project that you're trying to implement? And it's a wonderful, wonderful book. And what it really does is it brings the emotion back into, too many times I think we take emotion out of business. And I think one of the secrets is to put emotion back into business. So that was an excellent book. Another wonderful book called The Infinite Game. Have you heard of that one, by Simon Sinek?
I have heard of that one.
Very, very good. And what he talks about that is that the world-class organizations, they don't look at just the short-term metrics. They look at, what are we trying to accomplish as an organization? What's going to outlive me as a manager or as a CEO? Where are we trying to go, versus the concept of, what's the number we got to hit this month? And not saying that the number isn't important that we have to hit this month, but what's going to ensure that we continue success in the right is the bigger picture. We've got to look at it as the infinite game, not just the monthly score. Wonderful book. And then another one that I read because I saw the play is Hamilton by Ron Chernow. It's a big book. It's a long book. You're not reading this one on one brain flight.
You're not the first person to mention that. Several guests have read that because of the play.
It is very, very good, and I've learned a lot about. I have to admit, I didn't know that much about Alexander Hamilton, and very impressive book, very impressive story, and I'm probably close to 3/4 the way through it now. So by January, You know, I should be done because it's a long book, but very, very good.
The last guest that brought up Hamilton, I shared with, I work with some middle school kids at my church, and at the camp, we were just doing silly stuff, and somebody got on piano and I sang the King George part. And I've had so many requests from people in the Scaling Up Nation. They want me to do that on the air. And folks, I'm not going to do that because you'll stop listening to the show.
Oh, you should do it. I mean, that's such a great song. And I mean, that part in the play just, I think, makes the play.
I totally agree with you. So, well, speaking about plays and movies, when they make a play or movie about you, who plays you?
Yeah, of course, I would love to say, Tom Cruise, and some of your younger listeners may not recognize, well, they may recognize the name, but they may not really know who it is. But Jimmy Stewart. I love Jimmy Stewart. And the reason I would love him to, if he was still alive, the reason I would have loved to have him play me is most of his parts, here's a nice guy trying to do the right thing. And I just love just his cadence, his attitude, how he treated people. Here's a nice, I would, he's long gone, but if we could bring him back, he would be the one that I would say, I would love him to play me in a movie.
Well, I think you could do voiceover work for Norm Macdonald. Has anybody told you that?
Yeah, I've heard that many times. That's funny that you say that.
So my last question for you, now have the power to speak with anybody throughout history. Who would it be with and why?
Well, and it's going to sound like an obvious answer, but Walt Disney. A lot of people will say, did you ever work with Walt? And I always say, how old do you think I am? Yeah. I was 7 years old when Walt Disney died. But I literally owe my career to Walt Disney. And, I've got all the books, and I talked to many people who did work with Walt, and there's nothing that I enjoy more than sitting down and hearing them share their Walt stories. But to be able to sit down with Walt Disney and just say, just ask, how did you do it? What was going on in your mind when, you were in year 3 of creating Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and you were running out of money? What was going on in your mind? That day that Disneyland opened and things were going, one thing after another was going wrong. What was going on in your mind? How did you keep the energy of the team? How did you perpetuate all of this? Just to have an hour of sitting down with Walt Disney, that would be an hour that would be a highlight of my life.
Well, I appreciate you sharing some of those stories with us here today. This was a lot of fun. I know that you have helped a lot of people. You've inspired people to not just do tasks, but create experiences for their customers. And folks, I got to say, if you're creating experiences for your customers, they're probably not going to care so much when they get that few dollar price increase because they know the value that you're bringing. So thank you so much for helping us out with that.
It has been my absolute pleasure doing this. And you are a wonderful interviewer. You made this very easy. So I appreciate that.
Well, this was a lot of fun. So thanks for coming on the show, and buy the book. We'll have it on the show notes page. I think it's a short read, so you can say that you've read it without, reading something like Hamilton, and you're going to get a lot from it. Dennis, thanks again for coming on the Scaling Up H2O podcast. I know I learned a lot. I learned something every time I go to Disney. I want to thank you for writing your book. There's so many little nuggets of tips in that book that you can very easily read, as Dennis mentioned, on an airplane ride. And if you're not going anywhere on an airplane, it's not going to take you very long to read it. And it will give you some very simple things that you can start working on in your companies to enhance the experience for the end user. I did this with my team. We really enjoyed comparing and contrasting how we did things to how Disney does things. So folks, if you go to my show notes page, you can link directly to an Amazon affiliate link for Dennis's book. And Dennis, again, I want to thank you for helping elevate the customer service bar in the water treatment industry.
Nation, something we're trying to do with James McDonald is help us raise the bar in the water treatment industry. And each and every week this year, James is going to challenge us with James's Challenge. So here, once again, is another installment of James's Challenge.
Hello, Scaling Up Nation. James McDonald here for your next challenge, James's Challenge. As a reminder, during 2021, each week on Scaling Up H2O, you will hear my challenge of the week. There will be a variety of challenges from large to small, but the goal is that by the end of the year, you will become a better industrial water treatment professional, drop by drop. James's challenge of the week is clean, organize, and update your water testing kit and equipment. You don't want it to look unused, but you do want it to look respected and professional. One's tools are a reflection upon them. A dirty test kit with broken parts, illegible labels, and outdated components does not typically instill the greatest of confidence in those that see it. Show that you care about your profession by caring about your testing tools. Please consider sharing your experience on LinkedIn, tagging it with hashtag JC21 and hashtag ScalingUpH2O. I look forward to hearing about your experiences.
Nation, I hope you are enjoying these challenges. I hope they are making you grow. And I really hope that you are sharing your experiences with social media so we can all enjoy them together. Folks, one of the things that I want to make sure that you do each and every week is do a little something that pushes you to become better at whatever it is that you deem you need to become better with. I know a lot of times we will see somebody have success in a certain area and we'll just think, oh my gosh, I can never get to that level. Well, I want you to know that that thought is false, and you can rise to whichever level you desire if you put in the legwork. But I want you to realize that you've seen the results of the person that you're looking at and all of the legwork that they put in. So you're not going to achieve that overnight, but you can achieve that one day at a time, one task at a time. And when you start looking at it like that and you start figuring out what are the tasks that you need to do to achieve what you want to become, then it becomes bite-sized and you are able to accomplish it. So I hope you're thinking about those things. I hope you are talking to somebody else about those things so now they can help hold you accountable. There's just something magic that happens when you tell your dreams and aspirations and what the goals that you have to meet those dreams and aspirations, that it just brings them to life. And now it's out of your head, it's in the public view, and others are going to help hold you responsible that you're going to get those things done. That probably scares a lot of people, but I tell you, that is the magic sauce of getting things accomplished. I hope you are going to try some of the things that Dennis mentioned today. I know when you elevate the bar of customer service and people feel that they are appreciated, that they are getting from you something that they can't get from anybody else, that's going to be a customer that you're going to have for a very long time. And folks, I also hope that you join us next week on a brand new episode of Scaling Up H2O.